Thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
I'm glad you were not intimidated by the large head on the email, which was a little daunting, but it's nice to be with you. When I came, I was like flying home, was on this trip, which I'll talk about in a second, and I was flying home and I was in the like the LL lounge area, and I was looking at all of these people who I've known for years. Like I worked in the Jewish community for a long time, so there are all these people that I've known for years. Elliot Cosgrove, one of the rabbi of one of the largest synagogues in the country, certainly not the conservative, one's the largest conservative synagogue in the country. Like rabbis with massive platforms, the head of Birthright Israel. Like down the line, all these people who have these huge platforms by which they get to share the experience and then bring it forward. And so I sent a message later that day to Rabbi Annie and Rabbi Yosef and said, basically like, I have thoughts, I have ideas, I have questions that I'm wrestling with. I don't feel like I have answers, and I don't necessarily have a platform like those other people, but I have this community, and I wondered if there would be interest in sharing some of those thoughts. So that's why we're here. We're here for me to experiment and try and understand more about this complicated, awesome, beautiful, terrifying, scary, and inspiring place in the world. In thinking about this, I've been thinking a lot about this concept of witnessing. And in English, we say witnessing, but we also say bearing witness. Right? And so I've been thinking about, what does it mean to bear witness? When you bear witness, you think about bearing weight, right? Like you're carrying a weight. And so I've been trying to figure out, did I witness or am I bearing witness? And what is the difference between the two of them? And I kind of want to bear witness. Like I don't want to just have witnessed what I witnessed. I actually want to bear witness, but I don't know how. And so this is part of me trying to figure that out. And so I went to the Hebrew, because that's kind of the nerdy guy that I am, and tried to find the verb. I was like, oh, what's the verb of to witness? And there is not a verb that I've been able to find for to witness. Now, there's a noun. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, please. We have people who know these things. There's a noun, right? You can be an ed. You can be a witness. There is a noun. There is a status called I am a witness. I have seen something and my status has changed. But the transitory moment where I am witnessing something, like to witness, that's not verb that exists in Hebrew, which is kind of a powerful idea that the moment you have seen something, you are changed. Like if you put into Google Translate to witness, it says to be a witness. Like it says the Hebrew of liot like it's to be a witness. Like it doesn't even have a verb form. And I think that's like a really powerful concept, that once you have seen something, you are changed. Once you've seen something, you are changed. And I gotta tell you, like, I feel kind of changed based on this experience. I've been going to Israel a lot over the years, like many, many times. And this trip was very different than anything that I've ever done before. And it was, as I said, it was really moving and sad and powerful and beautiful all at the same time. So what I want to do is this. I want to tell you a little bit about my trip. I'm gonna talk about, I really came up with 4 ideas, contradictions, revelations, concepts that I'm playing with. Things that I was surprised about, things that were new to me, things that made me challenge some assumptions, things I thought I knew that I found out I was wrong about, and vice versa. So I want to play with those with you a little bit. And then we'll have a bunch of questions. If you have questions along the way, feel free. We'll make sure there's questions at the end, and we'll go from there. Sound good? Are we all in the right place? Are we all at the right meeting? Yeah. Amazing. Okay, so what was this trip? I was on a trip with foundation freshmen. So I worked for a family, a very generous philanthropic family. And so I was on a trip with other people who do what I do, which is work for generous families, either living or deceased, who give away charitable funds in Israel and in the Jewish community and beyond. There were about 20 of us. And we met with like a who's who in 4.5 days. We met with thinkers and sort of social leaders. We met with military folks, like leaderships in the military. We met with soldiers. We met with Haredim. We met with the president, President Herzog, and Michal Herzog. We met with parents of hostages. We met with you know there's this video, this 45-minute, like really horrific video that you may have heard about that they've been showing to like members of Congress and whatnot. So we did not see the video. They didn't want to show it to us, but we met with the guy who made the video. We met with the filmmaker of the video. We met with business leaders. We met with all these kibbutzniks that have been evacuated, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And the most striking piece, and I will show some pictures of this tonight, so you can, if you want to watch, you can watch it. If you want to close your eyes, some of it's hard to see, and a video of somebody who grew up in that neighborhood where I'm from Kfar Aza, Kibbutz Kfar Aza. So I'll show some of those pictures tonight. That was actually the most powerful, striking piece. Those are the thoughts and images that I have the most trouble getting out of my head, and that of little kids running around hotels where they should not be, because they should be at home. Not in a business hotel. Actually, when I walked right in, I'll tell you this real quick as a deviation. When I walked into the hotel for the first time, a hotel I've stayed at, I can't even count, countless times, this very fancy schmancy, businessy hotel, and I walk up and I try to get to the registration desk. Can I move for a second? I can move a little bit. Sorry. Yeah. So I walk up to the registration desk, and in front of the desk is a mom with these 3 little kids sitting on the ground, like right where you would need to walk up to check in, cutting up an apple, feeding the apple to her kids, because it's not a hotel. It's their home. It's these kibbutzniks have been moved there. So I just want to do one check. Okay, so caveats. I'm not an educator professionally. I'm not an Israeli historian. I'm an observer who has witnessed things and is coming and sharing them with you. So I'm glad that Abraham is here and glad Rabbi Andy's here. If your questions are more complicated, I'll try to answer the ones I can as best as possible. Okay. I just want to gut check. Like, is it worth it to do 5 minutes on Gazan history? Like history of Gaza? Is that a useful 5 minutes? Please. Okay, right. We will do 5 minutes on Gazan history. Again, I'm not a historian, I'm not an educator, but here's what I got. Okay, so the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is about 5 miles wide and about 25 miles from north to south. It's got 2.1 to 2.2 million people in it, depending on who you are asking, because different people count differently. Pre-1948, so pre-Israel statehood, there were about 100,000 people who lived there. During the War of Independence, it doubled in size. All of these people fled, Palestinians fled into that. So it went from 100,000 to about 200,000, and the space was like delineated like that. I mean, there's no historic line per se. Like the Gaza Strip was a concept that was created around that time by Egypt. Like Egypt delineated that space, and it butts, you know what, we can actually flip the picture. Yeah, this is a useful picture for now. So you can see like Egypt abuts the Gaza Strip, and the Gaza Strip is the pink, purple, blue, this part right here. Okay, everybody can see that? Okay, so that's the Gaza Strip. And Egypt created that concept, and Egypt controlled it from 48 to 67. It's a poor place at that time. It is a very ideologically charged place at that time. But Egypt will not let those 200,000 people who would love to flee into Egypt, they will not let them in. Okay, so they create barriers to let them in. In 1967, Israel occupies it, wins, in the war of 1967, when Israel expanded its territory, it included the Gaza Strip. And then in the negotiations, which were, I don't remember what year, when Israel negotiated with Egypt, 78-ish, yes, thank you, that sounds about right. Egypt said no. Like apparently Israel had offered to give the Gaza Strip as part of Egypt, and Egypt said no, we don't want that land, right? So already we have a people that for decades and decades and decades have not been wanted by anyone, right? It is a forgotten, poor, disenfranchised group of folks who are ignored by many people. So then fast forward, we get through intifadas, right? So the biggest change to the intifadas that's relevant here is, as opposed to negotiating with countries, with like Egypt or with Jordan, etc., Israel is now negotiating with the PLO. And so at that moment, when Israel starts negotiating with the PLO, other parties start emerging in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, which is basically like right there. Like the picture basically goes up to the West Bank. These parties start emerging. You get Palestinian Authority, you get Fatah, you get all these other parties that are then competing for power to be the negotiating entity that represents these people with Israel. Okay, so that shift that happens around the Intifada is from Israel negotiating with other countries to Israel negotiating with governments in some form, sort of a loose form of governments. the Clinton parameters. So now we're about 2000, right? Clinton negotiates all these pieces with Rabin, and Arafat offers basically a two-state solution. It fails. If you're curious as to my theory as to why it failed, we can talk about that. That's fun. I'm not so relevant for this, but interesting. And then Israel disengages from the Gaza Strip, and that's in 2005, late 2005, if I recall correctly, and that's like a pullback. So why does Israel disengage all the way from Gaza? The theory at the time was that this was like the beginning of a new state for Palestine, right? We couldn't do it in the West Bank because there's too much integration, but we can do it in the Gaza Strip. Horrific scenes of Israeli soldiers forcibly removing Jewish Israelis from their homes to create space. You remember that? Like tragic, horrific moment, but sacrifices made on behalf of peace in the Gaza Strip. And then what happens? Who wins the election? Not the Palestinian Authority, which is what Israel had thought, which is what the United States thought, which is what sort of the general community thought. Instead, Hamas wins those elections. And from 2006 till 2000, basically October 6, 2022, the policy of Israel has been to treat the Gaza Strip as a terrorist organization, entities or controlled by terrorists, and just to kind of keep a check on them. There's this fairly ugly phrase of mowing the lawn. Have you guys heard that phrase in this context? So basically, Hamas would build up forces and build up forces and build up forces, and so Israel would like come in and do some bombing and like cut them back and build up forces and then do some bombing. And it was they talked about the language of mowing the lawn. Like every once in a while, you just kind of got to mow the lawn to keep this this area at bay from a military threat for Israel. Okay, so that, as you can tell, maybe it's not the best situation to set up for October 7th, 2023. Actually, there's one other important piece of history, which is that in Israeli society, remember what's been going on throughout all of 2023 is the judicial protests. So at this moment, right, there's a perception that Hamas is decently weak because Israel's been doing a nice job of mowing the lawn. There is a perception amongst outsiders, as well as many Israelis, that Israeli society is divided because of these judicial protests. You have all these people saying, I won't fight in the reserves. I won't be called, if I'm called up, I will not fight because I will not fight for this government. I will not defend Israel. Remember, there was all those Air Force pilots, all these pilots who had signed the letters saying, I won't fight, right? So Israel is at this point of believing that Hamas is weak, give me one second, and believing Hamas is weak, and also Israel society being at this place of a lot of tensions. And recall on Yom Kippur, when we were sitting in the library having a conversation about Israel, and almost at exact moment in Tel Aviv, there were fistfights over a mechitza minyan in Tel Aviv on Yom Kippur. It was on Yom Kippur, and then like 12 days later, 10 days later, whatever it is, and yes, 12 days later is when this happens. Yes, you had a question.
The yellow strip, is that it?
Yes, okay, so I'll explain the map real quick. So this line right here is the Gaza Strip. The yellow line is the area that is Israel. That's the area that has been evacuated currently. So that's the 4 kilometers. You may have heard some people talk about 4 kilometers. So everything that's within 4 kilometers has been evacuated currently. So right there, all that is there are soldiers. Some people, you can do like, if your home is there, you can drive in and like get something from your home and leave, depending on exactly where you are and what's going on, but that's that. You'll see Gaza City. So remember when Israel was coming in first from the north and they were doing all this activity and they told everybody to go to the south, all the Gazans go to the south, so they attacked in Gaza there. You may be following the news lately, there's all this fighting around Khan Yunis. That's here, that's like down here farther in the south. There you go, Khan Yunis, which is here, okay? So, and then just to give a little bit of frame, because now we're up to October 7th, why not? This dotted, other things, Kfar Aza, which is the kibbutz that I visited, is up here, which we'll talk about in a second. Kibbutz Be'eri. Annie, did you go to Be'eri? Is that where you went?
Yeah.
Right, so kibbutz Be'eri is right here. That's where Annie was. Re'im, this is the dance party, the famous, very well-known dance party was Re'im. That's right there, okay? This red line reflects how far terrorists got. Okay, now recall, what's right here?
The West Bank.
The West Bank. Okay, so we need to recall how close they got to the West Bank, and that'll become relevant in a couple minutes. Okay, are we good on the map?
Should we turn the lights behind?
Yeah, we're gonna do it. Like,
He's not quite there. Oh.
give me 2 minutes. You know what's amazing? Having never done this presentation, like we're on page 7 and on page 1 at the same moment in this conversation. It's great. I love it. It's great. Okay, so the 3. That's Gazan history in 6 minutes. Pretty good, right? I want to talk about these three things that I didn't think were true, that I found out were true, or that I didn't know, that I figured out that I knew. And we'll go through them and we'll talk about them. The first is that October 7th was worse than I thought. Like, it was bad. We all know it was bad, but I'll tell you, it was just a lot worse than I thought. Hamas's attack, which I had viewed as a terrorist activity, was far more of a military activity than a terrorist activity. Yet people in Israel, for my most part, don't like to talk about it as a military activity, because then it sounds like you have one military against another military. And in the optics and the discussions, when it's one military against another military, it feels like there's some set of sort of acceptance of behaviors. You're now in rules of war, as opposed to the truly horrific genocidal activity that Hamas perpetrated on October 7th. The first thing that they did was they started launching rockets. The rockets had no expectation of landing anywhere in Israel. And by the way, since October 7th, not one rocket has killed one Israeli. Not one rocket has injured one Israeli. The only people who got hurt are people running to shelters who tripped. The only people who got hurt in Israel from rockets fired from Gaza. You think that's wrong, Annie?
Well, I don't know, when we were there, we met someone who had been injured in a rocket attack kind of near Jerusalem.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I've not heard that. Okay.
So.
I appreciate, great, fact checking live, I love fact checking, bring it on, totally fine. Wait, not a lot, okay, that's useful. So they launched these rockets, and then they launched balloons, okay? And the balloons, the first target of all those balloons was all the communications locations. Very, very targeted. They launched balloons with bombs in them, communications equipment through all of these towns. So all of the hours and hours and hours we've heard about that, where was the IDF and where were people? They had no communications. They had no eyes on what was going on, even though they typically would have eyes. P.S. This meant Hamas knew exactly where each of those communications hubs was, and they dropped bombs specifically on those and took out the communications equipment. The second round was into what's called kitot konanut. And kitot konanut is like, it's like civilian, it's like neighborhood watch groups in most places, but neighborhood watch groups, when you're in a tough neighborhood, have guns. They own guns. And they have stores of those guns. And so the second round was dropping bombs on all the kitot konanut in all of these towns so that the communities couldn't defend themselves. Okay, this was not a random set of terrorist activities. The plans were to connect the Gaza Strip to the West Bank. I had not heard that until I was in Israel, and I read a ton of news about this stuff. Sorry, Lori. I read a lot of news about this stuff. The plans were to connect from the Gaza Strip to the West Bank, and the soldiers have now, and I talked to soldiers who said, we've now found those plans. And the goal was to try to create an uprising connection between West Bank Palestinians and Gazans to try to attack Israel. And then if you had enough of a force, their hope was that Lebanon would get excited and attack from the north. Like, the expectation of October 7th was the destruction, the demolition of Israel entirely. Our tour guide on our trip is from Rahat, right here. Okay, amazing, amazing guy. He's from Rahat. He said that the party in Re'im was not on their maps. Everything else was on the maps. Re'im was not on, the party in Re'im was not on the maps. As horrific as that was, as devastating as the deaths and the brutality and the hostages are, he believes that if that hadn't happened, they would have gotten to Rahat, because that party slowed them down enough that they couldn't make it all the way. Okay. So I want to talk about Kfar Aza a little bit. I want to show you pictures. Hopefully a video will work. Kfar Aza, we could spend the whole night on Kfar Aza. Most powerful thing I've done. I don't know, most powerful thing I've done in Israel. It is one of the most powerful things I've done in Israel, to be sure. I'm going to show you pictures. I have a video. My son helped me make it. And there's about 950 people that live in Kfar Aza. About half the homes were destroyed. And I want to give you the sense of my experience going there, and I'll show you some photos. There's a smell. This was let's see, I was there the first week of December. So 2 months later, the smell of smoke still is there from homes that were burned. You hear the sounds of artillery firing, like Israeli artillery firing. I did not hear any, like, we never had an alert telling us that we had to go into a shelter. We never heard it. I never heard I never heard that alert for myself. But you hear the rockets, you hear firing going off all the time. And another piece of data is just that the place that was 1 kilometer away from, so Kfar Aza here, the place that was the closest within Kfar Aza was the place where the youngest residents lived. Not little kids, but like the 18-year-olds and the 20-year-olds, they're the ones. And so all these hostages that are of that age, it's in large part because that's who lived closest to the fence. Okay, so let me show you some pictures. Let me not show you some pictures. There we go. Okay, that was my proof that I actually went there. With little took a screenshot of myself as far as. That's the Kitot Kononut depot where they were storing their weapons. That was, and you can see the chart here along the top. That's because that was one of the places that a bomb got dropped on right away. All the homes are marked with the spray paint is from all the different people who have checked it, which includes the military, includes bomb specialists, because lots of the dead bodies were booby tracked. Large numbers of dead bodies were booby tracked. It includes, let's see if I can find one. It includes these signs. This is from this organization, Zaka, that goes in and collects every remnant of a body to be able to bury the body. So after the military has gone in to make sure there's nobody, like no terrorists still there, and after they have bomb detection, whatever, to make sure that there's no live munitions, then they send somebody in to make sure that there's enough, like, to clean up all of the deceased body parts. It's gross. Busted door frames. I just like this picture because the shoes are still hanging on the door. There's like a sense of reality that just got interrupted really quickly. Homes were burned, lots of evidence of smoke damage. There's a video of a woman who's being abducted and put into a Jeep and driven away that you may have seen many times, many times. This is the road that she was on. And that is the fence that's Gaza. It's not, excuse me, that's not Gaza, but that's like a security fence that gets you then to Gaza. But basically between that fence and Gaza, there's just an empty field.
Are these your pictures?
These are my pictures, yeah. These are all my pictures. I thought the koala bear was cute. And just like, yeah. During this time, the sound of, the other sound you hear is saws. And I will tell you, because they're saws, like jigsaws and circular saws, because they're want to board up windows and broken glass and whatnot. And there was part of me that wanted to tell them to stop, because I didn't want them to clean it up. And at the same time, of course they have to clean it up. Like, of course they have to clean it up. And we'll talk about what the future is like. That's a washing machine. That hole was actually created by the Israeli military. This is one of the final places where the terrorists were holed up. And so the Israeli military brought in a tank and blew a big hole inside. So almost all the damage we saw was from the Hamas, but there's a couple that were done by the Israeli military. Okay, this is the video. Let's hope the sound works. It's about 6 minutes. I'm sorry, it's a little long, but you'll get a feel. This guy is, I think we learned who he is, but his name's Ophir, and he grew up in the community. Hold on. And wait. Ooh. So far it's just been Hebrew. You haven't missed a nice few in Hebrew. Drink the sauce.
מתי חזרת?
חזרתי ב-20 משהו בפגרה.
היית בקשר עם המשפחה? בוואטסאפ? ידעת שהם בסדר מתי?
יום אחר.
24 שעות לא ידעת מה קורה איתה. So Ophir just shared, first of all, he was really born here, and his family is from here, and he's been living on his own in this area since he was a soldier at the age of 18, and he completed his army service, traveled for about a year at different places in the world, and he's still at a stage where he's traveling. On October 7th, he was actually in the United States. His family is here. So I asked him, when did you know that your family was okay? He said it was mom. And he said, I knew on Sunday. And so for 24 hours, you had no idea what was happening with them? And he said, yes.
גם לא היה תשמע, מבריינס לא ידע בטלפון של אצל דודי. נכנסו לו לדירה גם, עשו שפוק. פה בעצם גם הוא גם חברים מאוד טובים שלי. אנשים שהיינו יושבים פה כל לילה, כל יום, בשבת בצהריים, שבת בבוקר, אוכלים ביחד, אוכלים לפעמים ביחד. עושים פה שירים, שירה טובה.
So Phil just shared that on October 7th, both he and his brother were not the two siblings, but his parents were here. And since within a few hours, I mean, there was no reception here on purpose, and electricity was down, phones were off, batteries were dead, no way to communicate. His parents on Sunday, 24 hours into it, were rescued by the Divine unit. Once they were rescued, they knew what happened with them. I continued to ask him about, this street and what's happening here, what used to be here. So he talks about a very lively neighborhood where people sit together at the end of the day, where they share stories, they have a drink together, where they listen to music together, very different than what we're looking at right now. I'm gonna kidnapped, killed. Someone there is kidnapped. Is that on you? Okay.
Both of these are, they're still there, or they were?
Still there. Still there. I'll find out in a second, yeah. One person from the last one over here survived. They thought that he was dead. So we just continued.
פה הדרך שלנו נעלה, אם בתחום הבד, אינה בתחום הבד.
So here that they managed to lock the safe room door inside, and so the terrorists can go in. Person here is kidnapped, also kidnapped. He was sharing a story about a friend who did something. He lived in the last room of the stairs over there, and apparently that was trapped. Okay, meaning that they set the house on fire, but underneath the windows from the back, there were terrorists waiting with guns and knives. Because they knew that someone would jump out of the window, which he did. They captured him, started taking him towards Gaza. He realizes what is happening and he said, I'm not going to Gaza no matter what. He fought them, managed to escape. He hid in the bushes for about a day and he survived. And so, I mean, this sounds like Hollywood stories, right? This is not something that you would hear in 2023.
I heard stories of sexual assault and rape and like brutality of children, like from Ophir and from others in the community. I decided, and we have videotapes of it all. And if anybody really wants all that stuff, I'm happy to share it with you. There's like a limit to what we can bear in that bearing witness idea. So I think you get the idea. This guy alone, who's the guy in the black t-shirt, grew up not in there, but he grew up in a neighborhood nearby. As you can tell, he's fluent. So he's been recruited as a fundraiser to try to raise money to try to help out the community, which is why he was with us, a bunch of donors. And I've known the guy for, I don't know, 15 years or so that I've known alone. And I've worked on projects with him.
Yeah, so, you're presenting this whole thing as a surprise, and yet we hear in all the reporting that there were intelligence reports where this whole plan was known, and that it wasn't acted upon, that it was dismissed.
Yes.
So what are they telling you there?
Yeah, so there is lots and lots of evidence for those who've not heard about this, that, I mean, it exists, like the New York Times found it of all places, that plans were known. There's a whole gender issue where the people who had identified it were women intelligence officers who were rebuffed by large groups of men. There is so much anger, frustration, like I don't even have the words to describe, disappointment, feelings of abandonment. I actually said feelings of abandonment to somebody, and he's like, no, there's no feelings. We were abandoned. Like, it's not feelings of abandonment. It is actual abandonment by the IDF, by Secret Service, by the Israeli government, like just beyond. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about it in a second.
So what was the purpose and who did you travel with?
So the purpose of this was to learn. The purpose of this was just to get an understanding of what's actually going on. The purpose of this was to have a deeper, richer, more nuanced ability to be able to, like I work for a family that invests a lot of money in Israel, in Israeli society. And the question is, what do you do? So this family, this community is having a debate right now. Do we want to move back or not? If we want to move back, should we build it the same way that it was built before? Or should we tear the whole thing down and start over? If we're not going to move back, do we move to a community nearby that is similar, or do we move really, really far away because the trauma of it is too great? It is a kibbutz. They're trying to make the decisions collectively. They have a spirit of collective activity, and so we're a funder that's going to be asked to invest in whatever decision that gets made. But having been there and having seen it, I will be able to hopefully do a better job of advising the family on where we will donate. And I was with a bunch of other people who do jobs similar to mine. So it was about 20 of us. A lone photoman, the guy in the black shirt, said, can I just finish one piece and then we'll get to one other question? Is that okay? I don't want to cut you. Yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
You mentioned in 1978, there was 200,000 Palestinians in Gaza. Where did the other 1.8 million?
Yeah, so the 200,000 was in 1948. So from 1948 to 2022, there has been an increase, birth rates. There's not a lot of places to go. You can't get out. It's very hard to get out between Israel and Egypt. And there's lots of, I've heard, although I don't know if this is true, so I give this one with a grain of salt. I guess everything I say with a grain of salt, but in particular, that a number of Palestinians, citizens of Israel, Palestinian residents of Israel who weren't necessarily citizens, would find their way into Gaza because that's where their families were. Families all got separated in the war in 1948 and 1967. And so there has been a combination of a number of factors that has increased the population over. A lone photoman, the guy who's given that tour, said to me as we were walking on as I was saying goodbye to him, he's like, Adam, I'm never gonna have a bad day again. Given what he has seen and given what he's lived with, I'm never gonna have a bad day. And that idea has just been sitting with me. We haven't talked about hostages at all. I want to talk about hostages for 1 second. They mentioned all those homes. 2 of the hostages were the men who were killed by the IDF last Friday from that street, which I just found out this morning. It's like, I knew that news, right? But having been there, it means something different. And there is something, so to your question of why go? It's because it means something different for me to say I was there and I saw him point and then be able to make that connection.
I was just wondering what purpose.
Yeah, well, I understand. The hostage stuff is totally horrendous. I see my family in those hostage pictures. I see our extended family. It's like the stories are just awful. There's still, I used to think that the United States would do everything it possibly could if there were Americans ever held hostage somewhere, and yet there was Americans held hostage. We met with parents of an American citizen, Rachel and John Goldberg, who you may have seen. They're very public in terms of their mourning, and they're trying to get the word out. Rachel said something really fascinating, which is when she talks in Jewish groups, they tend to get it. When she talks to non-Jewish groups, they say, yeah, whatever, until she mentions that there's non-Jews amongst them. And the moment that she mentions non-Jews amongst them, people say, oh, really? I didn't realize there were non-Jews amongst them. Oh, really? I didn't realize that there are people from 8 countries, 5 different religions. It's like people need to feel a personal connection to it. She said, and I'm passing on her behalf. Oh, this is one thing. I should tell you a couple of, we'll finish the pictures really fast. That's just a drying rack. There was Sukkot everywhere, by the way, because remember, it was Simchat Torah, what was happening, they had taken down their Sukkot, including this one that had bullet holes in the side of the Sukkot. This is the guy running for mayor, and he was killed. There's signs all over of him. I didn't get a picture like of his face in the bus as we were driving by, but he got killed. The guy who was running for mayor. On behalf of the Poland Goldberg family, they told us about 1 minute a day. If you're interested in doing something, 1minuteaday.com, you put in where you live, it'll tell you the people to call and gives you a script. It is basically the only thing that you can do is get hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people to call elected officials and say, don't forget, it's been so many days since these people were hostages. So I invite you to do that. The soldier that I'm closest to, a guy that I've known for 20 years, probably 12 years, told me that he's been fighting, he's a sharpshooter. He said the worst days were during the ceasefire. I was like, why were the worst days during the ceasefire, Yoni? And he said, because we had a mission, we had a purpose, and we had to stop. And every day we didn't know whether we're going or we're not going, are we going or we're not going? And it was that, like, put that in your head in terms of how to think about hostages. Yossi Klein Halevi, a very famous writer, wrote letters to my Palestinian neighbor. He said to me, whatever we do, we can't afford to stop fighting, regardless of the hostages. Regardless of the hostages, which feels so counter to so much of my own inclination, which is like, how do you get to a place of peace? How do you free these people who are being held captive? It's just a complicated dynamics. Yeah.
Given that they're American hostages, can they comment why the US isn't sending in like the Navy SEALs or?
One would wonder. They are bemuddled and mystified as to why the United States is not doing everything impossible. And maybe they are, I don't know. But you would wonder, it's not a crazy question to ask of why the United States isn't doing. Okay, so number one is this big sense of just like how bad October 7th was. Number two for me is really about how terrorized Israel is and how much terrorized Israelis are. Not too surprising. For the first time in my life, I think of Israel as weak. Now, I'm 48 years old, so some of you happen to be slightly older than 48, and a number of you are far younger than 48, I'm sure. But I've never seen Israel as weak before, and Israel was weak, and Israelis feel weak in a way that I've not experienced before. Everyone I know talks about locking their doors at night, over and over, double checking their doors. Gun purchasing is through the roof. Like the incidence of people wanting to have weapons is through the roof. The family I work for, their next door neighbor had, like, their door has glass, like a, what's it called? Like a round the transom, thank you. And they changed out the glass. This is in Jerusalem. This is like West Jerusalem, like super safe areas of Jerusalem. Like they changed the glass to be wood, and then they're putting a plaster in its place. Bougie Herzog, President Herzog, if I can finish it, is okay. A couple things. Go ahead. Yes.
I've never started.
Yeah, fine. Why start now, right? Herzog said, we have faced war before and faced coming out of war before, but we've not faced the level of a lack of confidence in the military, the government. We've never faced this level of trauma or the agony of our civilians. We woke up to a reality where nothing is safe anymore. And Michal Herzog next to him said, yes, but you corrected him and said, but the trauma is still going. We're not done. We're being traumatized now every single day. Everyone is close to someone who died. That part I knew when that happens in a small country. There's a woman, Tina, who I've been friendly with. We had dinner on Sunday night. She said it was the first time in 2 months that she had like gone out to dinner. Her husband was called up on the 7th. She's a mom of 4 little kids. So she like got dressed for the first time and we're having dinner. We're having a great time laughing. And then afterwards, she goes to her car with somebody else who was with dinner, and we all get on the bus. And while she's walking to her car, we find out next morning, she gets a call that one of her cousins was killed that morning. And like the contrast was really powerful. There are hundreds of thousands of people who've been called up. There's hundreds of thousands of single parents who suddenly became single parents in a way that I never really thought of before. Because you know who the most people got called up? They're in their 20s and 30s, right? And you have little kids. There's a foundation that we do a lot of work with. They have a staff of about 15 people. It is 7 women and 8 men. All 8 men have been called up, except for the CEO. All 7 women are now single moms. How are they supposed to get any work done? Like the ability to just shift on a dime, like they're figuring out, but it's just traumatic. The kibbutzim, we talked about the kibbutzim theme a little bit. The one I've been in, they all go into these hotels. They're trying to like recreate school. It's actually super cute. This is a sign that, correct, can you help me translate? Because I was trying to figure this out, like the derech, the Or Haner, so Or Haner is the name of the kibbutz. So the way of Or Haner, the way to, is that stops?
It's like, that's how we called Hangover, the movie. So we said on the way to the wedding, you stop at Las Vegas.
Oh,
So it's on the way to the kibbutz, you stop at
Jerusalem. So they like printed up signs to try to create some reality. This was the signage, was like, what's happening for the little kids today? What movies we have today? Where are we going? It's like, it's a very much of a, like they're trying to create their lives there in a really powerful way. Okay, you had a question and you have a question, you have a question. Yes, yeah,
One more statement.
fine. Never gonna stop you either.
I'm not gonna even.
Perspective of age on the vulnerability of Israel.
Yeah.
I have always felt that Israel
course.
was weak and weak in the sense of being dependent upon the wealth and goodwill of the United States and some other countries.
I hear you, and you're not the only one who has made that note that amongst the generational reactions to this, for folks who are more of my generation, that idea of Israel as weak is more of a shock. And also there's huge implications in which which is like another talk about the implications of what's happening with Israel and the United States and how Israel is viewed by. I would love to sort of put that in a box and put it off to the side if that's okay, because that has all sorts of complicated implications, but yes.
So I thought I read someplace that, at some point relatively soon, the kibbutz people staying in all these different hotels are going to be asked to move. Is that true?
Yeah, so the government, so it's a little complicated because what we read is like the kibbutzniks and the complexity of all these different, Kfar Aza, they're not moving anytime soon. But some of them that are farther out, like the one that was at our hotel, nobody was killed, nobody was kidnapped, they didn't lose anybody on October 7th. Their kibbutz is fine, it's just relatively close. So could they move back? So some of them don't want to because they feel traumatized. So does the government have a responsibility? Right, government's paying all these hotels for all these people who move. So there's debates within Israeli society that says clearly Kfar Azaniks don't need to move unless they want to out of that hotel. But somebody that's at a kibbutz that's the one that this one, right? Like the Or Haner kibbutz, maybe the government. Why is the government paying for them to be at the Orient? For gosh sakes, it's like this nice hotel, and their kibbutz is fine. So maybe they should go back, and maybe the government stop it. So there's debates within Israeli society at the moment of what should be paid for and what should not be paid for. P.S. At a moment where hundreds of thousands of the most productive people of society are not working, the economy is really, really struggling. We got a nice table in a nice restaurant with zero notice on a Thursday night in Tel Aviv. Like that doesn't happen, but nobody's there. So it's like it has ramifications. The answer to your question is ramifications that are beyond just are they going to get kicked out or not, because it's very community specific. Okay, we talked about number one of just how bad October 7th was. Number two is how bad things are to Israel. I'm going to start getting a little more positive, which would not be hard, but just so you know where we're headed, it's a little more positive.
Before you
Yes,
go,
Brian.
what are you saying about the response? Like people were hunkered down, you said for a
Yeah.
day, many hours, and
Yeah.
nobody was there. Like,
People are just devastated and mortified. That guy Ophir said that he has a friend who was in a safe room and heard the Hamas people walking around his house, found his wallet and purchased items with his credit cards to be shipped to his house in Gaza. Like, imagine the amount of time that needs to happen, the amount of calmness that somebody needs to feel that they can not just grab the money and run, but pull out your phone, flip up to Amazon, whatever, and find the, it is unbelievable, and people are just livid and mortified. And if you look at the surveys of people, the views of the current government are very, very low. And if elections were held, there's no reason elections are going to happen very soon. But if elections were held right now, the Likud government and this coalition would lose in large part because of people just feel so undermined by the current government. There was a whole bunch of, okay, let me keep on moving to more positive things. The third for me is that's how much societal roles have been upended. Okay, some for bad and some for good. I promise the fourth is all positive, the third is sort of quasi-positive. People thought the protesters wouldn't fight. Those judicial reform protesters, they thought they wouldn't fight, but they did. Blue and White, one of the leading organizations around the protests, became Achim L'Neshek, brothers and sisters in arms, and that raised millions of dollars for supplies and goods. Shalem College became, this is just cute. Those are just little kids at like kindergartners. It's just cuteness, that's what it is. Shalem College, which has no students at the moment because everyone who's been called up or is home taking care of people, became a Hamal, like a war room, but it's like not for,
Center,
like they're distributing hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars worth of supplies for all these displaced people. So much so, what's next? Remember, like, we have enough iPads. We're good. We're good on the iPads. Like, and it's been totally changed. Like, this idea of who is civil society and who are the elite and who the elite going to care about has all been upturned. People thought Haredim would never fight. There is at least 1,200 Haredim in the army. There's 4,000 of them in the reserves. There's a whole unit of Haredim who are doing the care for people who've been bodies that have been killed and trying to take care of them. But they're doing it in the army. They're wearing greens, which is a crazy thing to think of Haredim. And the biggest piece of it for those of us in the space who are fund work with Haredi integration, which we do, is that the rabbis, the senior rabbis, are not putting kibosh. Like there's always been this force from younger Haredim who want to integrate, and the more senior, older folks say no. And right now the younger people want to integrate, and the senior people are saying, okay, they're not. I don't know if they're saying yes, but they're at least not saying no. People thought that in this type of moment that all the Palestinian citizens of Israel, so not West Bank, not Gaza, Palestinians in Israel, 20% of Israel, 20%, 19%, 20%-ish, about 20% of Israelis thought that they would, who would they side with, that they would side with Palestinians, but they have not. They have been relatively calm. Now, the West Bank has had some violence. We can talk about that if people are curious, but within Israel proper, there's been almost none. And the Palestinians that we work with that I know are all supportive of this war. They all believe Hamas cannot exist. I asked a guy who do some work, he does environmental work. His line is that the environment doesn't care where the line is, nor what color it is, which I really appreciate. So he does work with Jordanian and Israeli and Palestinian environmental ministers on air quality and water quality. And he said 95%, easily 95% of Palestinians of Israel support this war. They believe that Hamas must be defeated. That's a crazy idea that within Israeli society, you have that going on. Remember all of the fighting that we talked about. It was getting worse. And I have this question of like, if you're willing, and now in the units, in the army units, they're very diverse. Pardon me for a second, sorry. The army units themselves are very diverse. They have dati, like religious and secular. They have Ashkenazi and Sephardi. They have big towns and rural communities, all in the same army units. And so the question is, these same people who have been fighting each other in the streets, protesting week after week over the judicial reform, who are now, as opposed to being on opposite sides, are now on the same side, what's going to happen afterwards? I was thinking about this idea that they were willing to, like they're willing to die together. And the question is, can they actually live together? Is an interesting question for me. So that's like this third piece of like all of these roles that are getting flipped around. And then the fourth piece is the spirit of Israelis, which was just unbelievably positive, incredibly, incredibly positive. The government was not there. Over and over, we heard the government failed us, the IDF failed us, but who didn't? The people. The people stood up and responded. So we were with friends on October 7th when we first heard about this. On October 8th, that I learned that one of the grantees, the CEOs of one of the organizations that the place I work for, the Abib Foundation funds, the grantee was killed. Moshe Ohayon was killed defending Ofakim, not where he lived. He drove to Ofakim to try to defend it, and he was killed on October 7th. The people, so like the government failed, the people at the top failed, but the masses survived. Those Hamalim, those like distribution centers, like the one at Shalem College, why is it that people are volunteering to distribute food? The government of Israel should be doing this. This is a social service. There's 50% tax rate for gosh sakes. Like they should be able to handle this, but they have not. But who is taking care of it? All the people have stood up. All the people who said that Americans were walking away from Israel. right? And what happened during this moment? There's been $2 billion of American financial contributions, including probably 2 billion duffel bags worth of supplies.
One of them for
That's
here.
just us.
That's just us. Somebody asked me if I would join Operation Return the Duffels. Kid you not, there's a WhatsApp group where you can say, I'm going back on this date, and they'll give you like duffel bags to bring back empty duffel bags to the United States to refill the duffel bags. In the Yom Kippur War, there were 8 Medal of Honor recipients in the Yom Kippur War. Based on the standards, a guy who like is a military historian and analyst guy said there are 120 people in this war who have met the standards that were established that got those 8 people in the Yom Kippur War. I don't know if it's true, but it's a fascinating story. You know, this line, right? They ask for they assume when they call up reservists, they get 80%. So you ask for 100% and you get the 80%, but they asked 100% and they got 130%, 140%, depending on who you ask. The signs for bring them home for the hostage. I don't know if anyone who's been to Israel knows this walk. This is like right when you're the last thing you do before you enter, and the big ass mezuzah is like right down there at the bottom of that walkway. So each one of these signs is of a hostage. Okay, and then you can see there's gaps. When they learn that a hostage has been freed or a hostage has been killed, they take down the sign. It's just everywhere. Walking in Tel Aviv, a sign, big, huge thing. This is like in the hostage square that you may have heard about in the news. It's a very powerful place to go. Bring them home now. It's just everywhere. This is a coffee shop, you know, and it's like organic coffee roasters, healthy seasonal menu. It's delicious, but then bring them home now, right on top. Even to more graffiti, walking by a random dress shop in which people become very patriotic along the way. And because it's still Israel and it was Erev Hanukkah, that's all Sufganiyot. Like all the Sufganiyot are still out amongst all of this moment. Like it is a wartime, but it doesn't feel, like, I didn't feel unsafe ever. Even amongst the moment when I was in Kfar Aza and you heard all those booms, they kept saying those are all Israeli booms. It's all coming from Israel. Nothing was coming from Gaza. It's all going outward, not coming inward. And yet this was everywhere. Like the mourning was everywhere. The candles were everywhere. Like in the park, there'd be like a little memorial that's just set up in a little bit of a park. It's just overcoming for people's lives in a really deep way. I wanted to leave with end this frontal piece, and hopefully we can have some conversation with 2 questions. The first is, what does it mean to rebuild? And I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm in the rebuilding business. I'm in the building business, one could argue. And I came to a conclusion recently that I don't think we should rebuild. Because the Israel of October 6th was not a good place. It was a broken place. We were scared. We were nervous about Israel's civil society. We were nervous about the relationship between secular religious, and we were nervous about the relationship between Jewish Israelis and Muslim and Christian Israelis, and what was the relationship between Israel and diaspora. Like, if we were to rebuild again, I don't actually think what was there was the right thing to have built. And so the question is actually what is the Israel that should be built now? Micha Goodman, who's a writer, orator, speaker, visionary thinker, he talks about it as the second refounding of the state of Israel. That we have this amazing moment. And he, as an Israeli, said, one of the things we have to fix is the relationship with Americans. That we have to acknowledge the fact that half of the world's Jews, more than half the world's Jews, I don't actually know the numbers, at least half the world's Jews don't live in Israel, but yet have a vested interest in what happens there. And so it begs a question for me of what does it look like for us to think about our role as Americans, all due respect, in helping refound the state of Israel at this moment post whatever is going to happen. So that's question number 1. Question number 2, when I asked Israelis what you hope for, 100% said victory. When I've asked Americans, what are you hoping for? Everybody says peace. And I'm not sure what to wish for. I'm struggling. I'm struggling with this question of what does it mean to be peaceful? What does it mean for me to have that vision of security of Israel again? What does it mean for me to hold the conflicts around hostages and what you do or don't do for hostages towards this goal of peace? And can you handle Hamas being on your door? And knowing all these people who feel like they have to lock their doors multiple times every night and are concerned about sending their kids to the army, and they are also committed to winning, to defeating Hamas. And so I'm sitting with a struggle of what to wish for at this moment of a lot of complexity. So I want to have that conversation. Like, I want to have a conversation about what to hope for. I want to have a conversation about what is our role as Americans. And I just appreciate you coming and sharing in that learning process. So thank you. I'm curious.
Victory look like?
Yeah, yeah.
What is something, what does the
Yeah.
what do Israelis call victory?
Yeah, so there's several different answers to the question, what do Israelis call victory that I've heard? And Avram, I'm curious what you hear on this one too, amongst all the Shlichim and others.
Yes, please.
The ones I hear, there is certainly Hamas can't do this again. We can't be vulnerable to Hamas. So that's like one answer to the question is the lack, like we have to feel secure from a Hamas attack. There's another, which is we have to have enough deterrence that others won't do the same. There's a huge fear about the Northern Front and what's gonna happen on the Northern Front. And lots of people who have told me, like, Israel doesn't need to be doing what it's doing in Gaza in terms of civilians and the brutality of what they're doing, but they have to as a deterrence for all the other countries who are to keep watching. And that's a term, I mean, I don't know if I buy that logic, but it is a horrendous calculation to have to make in terms of what winning looks like. Some people, winning is hostages. And you started to see just over this past weekend, there was a rally, a celebration, a protest, there was something, like lots of people described it in different ways on Saturday night. Remember back in the judicial reform, every Saturday night there were protests, there's one this past Saturday night, and it was all about hostages. And bring them home now, it was achshav, like they wanted the hostages now. So there's lots of questions, I don't know the answer to the question of what victory looks like, but those are the narratives at least that I've heard. Is that?
I know that bringing the hostages home is what most of the people that I've asked have been saying, and it's like more of a sentence than like a real thing, but destroying Hamas, and that's like the sentence that's been said over and over again. And I don't think anybody knows what it really means, destroying Hamas, but that's what they say.
Hamas as a military is very weak at the moment, and it seems pretty clear that we're within a few weeks of the Hamas military being dismantled. Hamas as an idea, Hamas as a brand is far stronger now than it was on October 6th. So I don't know what that means in terms of what does it mean to defeat Hamas, because you can win this, like Israel will control the Gaza Strip relatively soon. They're just doing it very, very slowly. The question of what happens next with the idea and the threats and stuff, I don't know.
Are people thinking about that?
Oh,
It's making me very nervous.
yes, there are lots and lots of people thinking about it. Well,
Not
sorry,
you and
when you
me.
say that, there's many answers for thinking about that. That could be who's gonna control the Gaza Strip. That could be what is Israeli life gonna look like from a sense of security when this is done.
Palestinian life.
Israeli, right? Like I didn't say
Yes.
Jewish Israeli, even like Jewish Israeli versus Palestinian Israeli. What, like, there's many questions that are on the table of what does that look like? I know of 4 funds that are raising money that have already raised at least $200 million each for, we're gonna be the ones who are gonna rebuild Israel. And they each have their own bureaucracy and decision-making frameworks, whatever. I know of 4 of them, which probably means there's 8 of them at least. So there's lots of people who are thinking about this, and it is not clear. You know, belying my own politics, like the fact that Bibi is leading this effort as the government is incredibly problematic, and that makes this whole process of like rebuilding and developing a fabric. So like, think about great leaders of countries that have gone through wars. It can actually be a really powerful unifying effort, and that is not what is happening at the moment because of the coalition and the strategies. Can't happen.
So
Mr. Simon.
I'm very troubled every time I hear the phrase, bring the hostages home or bring them home now. Because I've never heard a second sentence say how.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel sad and, angry that there are hostages and sympathetic with people who have family or friends who are hostages. It's horrible.
Yeah.
And at the same time, maybe very naive. It's a nice rallying cry, but how does it become a policy or a strategy or a plan?
Yeah, so the question was about how do you actually bring hostages home now? I'm not a military strategist, so I will tell you what I've heard, and you can take it for what it's worth. The part of it is just, it's a rallying cry. Like, it's just a focus of like energy. Like, if you don't, there's nothing else to do. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna protest to bring the hostages home because it's something that I can relate to. So there's that piece of it. I think the most tangible is how much time and energy you spend negotiating. Everything that I've read about what happened during that week of ceasefire when hostages were being released is that Hamas refortified. They refortified their locations, they cleaned up bases, they built launchers, they did all of these things. I heard a story, but it's secondhand, so I'm sort of reluctant to share it, but the person who told me is reliable, so I don't know. So I'll share it with the big asterisk of maybe it's not true, that the IDF, there was 2 hostages, 2 of the kids that were being guarded, and the Israeli military during the ceasefire saw a shift change. And there was nobody watching these kids except for 1 soldier. And so they called in to say, should we take out the soldier and rescue these 2 kids during the ceasefire? And the callback was no. Keep the ceasefire because we're getting 10 hostages, not 2 hostages. It's an so I don't know the answer to your question, like militarily, but can you imagine that it's an impossible decision-making framework? Do they just bomb, right? Like, Israel could just pull out all of its troops and just, fire in lots of rockets from airplanes, but then you're gonna kill all those hostages and a bunch of innocent Palestinians along the same way. So I think a lot of it is about rallying cry and energy, and less of the people protesting have specific military strategy advice for the idea.
Do you think UNRWA is gonna survive, and what does the average Gazan really feel about Hamas? Because there's
Yeah.
Stories on both sides.
Yeah, so I have I will not feign to have enough confidence and opinion on UNRWA. Like, how the United Nations does and does not get involved, how these entities engage, it's not something I've spent enough time on to have a thoughtful opinion, let's put it that way. The opinions of Gazans is pretty impossible to figure out because the information sources are Hamas, right? When you see Gazan Health Ministry said X number of people died, Gazan Health Ministry is Hamas, right? Like, it's not, in the paper, they don't say Hamas's ministry, they say Gazan Health Ministry. I've heard 2 very strong, passionate narratives that Hamas has galvanized the Palestinian people in a really powerful way, and people are really excited by Hamas at this moment. And I've also heard that people are on the breaking point, and this wasn't worth it, and how could they possibly lead us down this way? I've heard both from reputable researchers, and so I don't know. I don't know if there's actually a way to know for sure.
So, as a very left-leaning liberal person personally,
Yes.
what do we do here?
Yeah.
When we don't have the allies that we thought we did with everything here
In North America.
in North America?
Yeah, so the question was referencing the lack of progressive allies in the United States, particularly those I think that the Jewish community has been working with closely for a long time. If I can, is that a fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, this has been hard.
It's
This has been really, really painful to see people that we have treated as friends, as allies, that we've shown up, not because we haven't shown up. Look, I don't think the Jewish community has shown up around issues around immigration and racial justice and the environment and abortion because we know that someday we're gonna need those people to be allies with us. I think we show up because those are the Jewish values that drive us, right? So we're not showing up but at the same time, gosh, I really thought those people would be with us. Like, I really thought they would. Now, the narrative, the conversation my dad and I had about whether Israel has power or not, who has control or who not.
What do they see in Israel? Like,
Correct. When you look at Israel, if you look at Israel and you only have known Israel as a very strong player, it is and by the way, Israeli leadership look like white European Jews, not like the 50% of Israelis who are not white, right? So 20% of Israelis are Palestinians, and another 40% of Israelis are Jewish of Mizrahi Sephardi descent, so they're not white also. It's half, but that half are those that are represented in government, like Bibi Netanyahu is a white guy that looks like the other white people. And so you have all of the language and visuals that we are used to seeing in the United States about oppressed and oppressor through a racial justice lens. If you apply, which it doesn't work, but if you were to try to apply a US racial justice lens, which derives a lot of progressive thought today, on what's going on in Israel, it doesn't work. But if you were to do it with limited information, of course you would see Israel as powerful, beating up on innocent Palestinians. The reality is so much more complicated than that, and it's just really hard, right? Like how many people know the difference between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank? We do, but as my mother and I have often said, I struggle to remember the difference between Sunni and Shia. And why should I? So why do I expect others necessarily to have the level of nuance that I want them to have to be able to get it? So this is a very long way of saying I struggle with this mightily. There are a small number of people who are doing an amazing job right now of rebuilding relationships. Rabbi Sharon Brous was on Ezra Klein's podcast a number of weeks back. Yeah, it's good. It's a good one. It was very, very good. And Sharon said, we have two choices. We have choices then. Either we can say, okay, those weren't our friends. We gotta go off on our own. That's not Jewish and it's not strategic. Or we can say, wow, that was really painful. That really hurt. We have a lot of work to do. And then we get to work. And so I opt for the latter. Maybe we'll do like one more question and then we can like break up here. Yeah.
I was just thinking ahead a little bit about what this is going to do to make a shift in the next round of Israeli elections, that, you know, how it's going to impact the fact that so many Israelis are feeling like their government is not behind them.
Yeah, if elections were held today, Likud would lose, I don't know, 2 dozen seats. I mean, it would be a massive loss for Likud, and one of the centrist parties, Benny Gantz, probably would gain tremendous seats, and it would be a totally different government. There's only 2 ways that elections can happen. So that would be what like it seems very likely that's what happened if elections were held right now. There's only 2 ways that elections can happen in Israel, or 3. First is you wait until the end of Bibi's term, which is, I don't know, years. 3 years. 3 more years, right? So that's scenario number 1.
Yeah.
Scenario number 2 is that his ministers revolt and say we don't want him anymore. His ministers who have 0 incentive to do that because they would not be in power and they're getting so much of what they want. They're these far right ministers. So they have no incentive to do that. So that seems like a very unlikely scenario. The third scenario, which is the most likely scenario, is that enough Likudniks say we don't want Bibi to be the lead of our party anymore. It doesn't actually take that many of them, but there would have to be, like within Likud, there has to be an uprising within Likud and sort of a revolution within Likud. That's of the unlikely scenarios, that is the most likely of the unlikely scenarios. I guess there's a fourth, which is that Bibi steps down, but I don't see any reason why that. Okay. Thanks for being on the journey and learning with me, everybody. Really appreciate it.
And thank you, for bringing your Torah, your wisdom, your reflections, and your questions to us. And it was eye-opening for all of us. We can continue these conversations and continue living into these very heavy questions. But thank you for bearing witness and bringing us in to bear witness with you. I want to thank Jen and Abraham, and also lift up on January 4th, we'll have another Israel conversation, Israel on Tap with Ido. I don't know if you want to say anything about the program. Yeah.
So Ido just came back a couple of weeks ago from the reserves. He served in a tank in Gaza, so he's gonna share a little bit of his experience, and we're gonna drink beer together.
At Landmade.
Yeah, at
Brewery,
Landmade.
January 4th. So hopefully we can continue the conversation. Jen is traveling on Thursday to Israel to hug Sophie so soon. And we are just praying that your journey will be safe and meaningful and full of love. And we can't wait to also hear from you about your experiences. Misiya Tova. And
January 7th, Adams.
yes, oh, like Adam's looking, but yes,
Talking to Sarah Horowitz, there are flyers that if you're interested. I will say this every time I see you, by the way.
fantastic. And I hope everybody has some restorative time as winter kind of roars in today. We'll stay warm in community. Be safe and good to be with all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, guys.